with everything that's going on, you're not going to outlaw everything. You got to at least make it harder to get those crazy guns that everybody's using. I don't think you should be able to just walk in there and buy one. You got to be able to go through, a rigorous process to be able to buy something like that, I think. So, hopefully the people that get paid to make those decisions figure that out. My job is to play football, but hopefully the politicians can figure that one out.
I'll tell you what, Joe Burrow speaks out after Uvalde, the tragedy in Texas, the school shooting. Now he comes out, Roe versus Wade is overturned. Obviously a national point of concern, a massive seismic shift, I think, in our country. And we have not seen a lot of male athletes come out expressing opinions about this. Joe Burrow, however, we see in his Instagram feed, comes out and says, basically takes a stance here and says, this is something he cares about and he's going to speak out about it. He's not going to be silent. I think it's really interesting. Joe Burrow in the heart of the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan, Ohio. People don't want to hear a lot of opinions about gun control. They don't want to hear a lot of opinions about pro-choice or abortion or Roe versus Wade. And yet you've got Joe Burrow coming out here and saying, look, I'm going to express myself. I have a platform here and it's important to me. And frankly, I think some people are looking at this situation, looking at him and saying, we could probably do with a little more of that, particularly in an NFL that's been pretty silent on the fall of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, but Charles, it goes back even to him coming into the league where he was speaking out on social justice and racial equality. I have so much respect for Joe Burrow for speaking on these issues. I remember once during the 2011, or let me backtrack. We know owners don't like what they call distractions, and they like their quarterbacks to sort of set the tone for the culture of the locker room in terms of not creating distractions. And I remember back in the 2011 labor negotiations, and I was out with a former MVP, league MVP, a quarterback, and I said to him, why aren't more quarterbacks speaking out on this issue? Because it relates directly to you as a player, these labor negotiations. And I will never forget this. The player said to me, you have to understand that we quarterbacks, we have relationships with owners beyond our playing days. And therefore, in essence, they don't want to say anything that's going to compromise that relationship once they're done playing. Well, when I see someone like Joe Burrow speaking out in this way, I see a young man who is speaking out on principle and isn't worried about profit or his pocketbook. He is worried about people and principle. And from that standpoint, I just have so much respect for him because, as you said, leading into this, it's rare to see our athletes speaking out in this way at that position in particular. But to see a young white quarterback speaking out on issues of racial equality and social justice, and now all of these things, I can't applaud Joe Burrow long enough. I think it's tremendous, and I think hopefully we will see more from other players. This Roe v. Wade decision is not simply a women's issue. It is a all of us issue. And I applaud Joe Burrow.
I'm curious if this is part of seeing, you and I have both known, covering the league as long as we have, the tremendous platform that quarterbacks in particular have. Not only in where it concerns, how the offense is shaped in the NFL, how rules get shaped, protecting quarterbacks, all these different things. But they've always had an ability when they open their mouths to cause ripples, to cause people to look. When labor negotiations happen, remember, the first thing we always hear is, hey, when the union is fighting against the NFL and there's a CBA coming up, get those quarterbacks lined up. We want those quarterbacks out front, talking about this because people listen. And now all of a sudden we're seeing a generation of younger guys come into the league that realize, well, I can talk about a lot of things. I don't just have to talk about labor. I don't just have to talk about the game. I can talk about other things beyond this. And what's interesting about Burrow is he is heading toward, if last season is any indication, superstardom. This is a guy who could potentially be one of the faces of the league. If he's not already, he could definitely solidify that next season if he were to repeat what he did in 2021. And just the fact that he is going out on a limb and speaking, I guess, what is ultimately his truth, and then doing it in the heart of Ohio, of all places. Again, having grown up in Michigan, I know what it's like to go out and say things like this and engage in this kind of a debate. That's not easy, and I'm sure there's a segment of the Cincinnati Bengals fan base that's sitting there going, yeah, I don't know if I agree with that, and they're going to have to listen to it because I don't think Joe Burrow is going to be quiet about this.
No, he's not, and he shouldn't be, in my opinion. These issues are too serious to simply remain silent on. So what this reminds me of also is a larger conversation. I go back to 2006 when Roger Goodell was voted in as commissioner. And the following week after being named commissioner, I remember he flew out to the Bay Area, out to, I can't remember if the game was in Oakland or in San Francisco, to a preseason game between the 49ers and the Raiders. And he met with Dr. Harry Edwards, a respected sociologist who was also part of the Black Fist movement at the '68 Olympics. And I remember Dr. Edwards telling me that the commissioner wanted to get a lay of the land of the NFL. And one of the things that Dr. Edwards said that he relayed to the commissioner was that the face of the league is changing. It is becoming more black, and these black players are going to become the face of your league, and they are not going to leave their communities at the locker room door. And exactly 10 years later, we saw Colin Kaepernick take a knee to address some of these issues. And I think what players have learned from that is that there is power in their voice, that they can participate in terms of making positive change in this country. And I think from that, you see guys like Joe Burrow who are willing to speak out on issues beyond just the social justice or the racial justice issue, but also these other issues that affect all of society. And again, for that, I applaud him.
I got to tell you, when we're talking about the NFL, particularly as it concerns Roe versus Wade, and you talk about Goodell's sort of history and in some ways checkered history with the embrace of social justice, or coming around pretty slow on certain aspects of it. They've been pretty silent. The league, by and large, has been pretty silent on Roe versus Wade, which, frankly, should be a little disappointing considering you and I, what have we heard from the league office, from Park Avenue for years now? Well, look at women in the sport. They're becoming coaches. They're becoming executives. There's a future female general manager in the offing at some point for an NFL team. And then this happens with Roe versus Wade. Huge issue where, half of the league's executive makeup, or if not half, a sizable percentage of the league's executive makeup, or when you look at just who teams employ, are affected by this. And yet the league has been pretty quiet about it. Why? Why be quiet about an issue that clearly matters to particularly a gender, and really it should matter to both genders, but a gender that you have said, hey, we're making big strides in opening every avenue of our game to women?
Charles, I think you know the answer to that. Number one, the NFL is rarely, if ever, proactive on an issue. It is always reactionary, or for the most part, reactionary. I don't want to paint with a broad brush and say always, but at least as far as I can remember, the NFL in every major case is reactionary instead of being proactive. And like we talked about with Deshaun Watson yesterday, it will float out ideas as if putting its finger in the air to see which way the wind of public sentiment is blowing, and then make decisions based on that. The other thing I would say to you is, this is not a clear-cut issue as some of us would like it to believe. There are women out there, as you know, who believe and support the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So the NFL as a business has to ask itself, if we come out strongly in favor of Roe v. Wade, how many women then are we alienating who support the overturning of Roe v. Wade? I know where you fall on it. I know where I fall on it. But as a practical matter, again, the NFL is a business, and they look at the bottom line on everything, and that's why they are typically reactionary instead of proactive. And I have to believe the discussions are going on internally about, if we do say something publicly, who are we going to alienate in this, particularly at a time where, as you said, the outreach to women has been so strong in recent years.
Yeah, it's wild times. It's wild times. I hope we see more, though, of individuals recognizing the platform and not being afraid to speak. I mean, at the very least, people can look at Joe Burrow and say, I don't have to be silent about how I feel, and I have a position where at least people will listen.
Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.